Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the farm. I want to take you back to a weird day. Back in July of 2024, I left work a little bit early and I wanted to come to the farm because the grass was long and I wanted to brush hog it. As usual, when I come to the farm, I do a little bit of work and then I either send the drone up or I do a walk around for some landscape and scenery imagery for my YouTube videos. Today was no different. I got some scenery, I did some work, I did some more shooting, I did a little bit more work, but then I sent the drone up and something was off. The wind picked up to a point that I could no longer fly the drone. So I landed it, and as soon as I did, all hell broke loose. The wind whipped up to the point that trees were bent over sideways and the sky in the west was turning black. So I got everything into my truck and I took off, and not 2 minutes later, a severe thunderstorm alert came over the phone, and off in the distance, the sky was black. 2 or 3 minutes later, the clouds opened, and you couldn't even see. It was a torrential rainstorm. Well, I made it inside, I dried off and changed, and I started folding some laundry. But this is when things started to get weird. We have storms all the time, and we seldom have power outages. But today, the wind was blowing sideways. You couldn't see outside because of the rain, and we started to have brownouts. And these just don't happen. And then all at once, the power went out. This is the point that I started to get just a little bit concerned. And just like that, the second phone alert came out, and it was a tornado warning. We don't have tornadoes in central New York. So I looked out the window, and sure enough, there was a column of black amidst the whiteout of rain. I could see it clearly, but this couldn't be a tornado. So I just looked out the window for about 2 or 3 seconds, and I noticed it was moving. And like a lightning bolt in my head, I said, "Holy shit, this is a tornado," and I took off through my second story to get downstairs heading toward the basement. I frantically called my mom on my way down the stairs and told her, "Get to the basement now." So I made it to the downstairs landing where my back door is. I went to reach around the corner to open my basement door, and a gigantic tree branch burst through my back door, took my legs out, and sent me falling down my basement stairs. Shaken and bruised, I crawled across my basement floor under a folding table. Glass was shattering all around me. Massive bangs were happening on my house, and I pulled out my phone to try and figure out what was going on. As it turns out, all communication in the city was out, including cell phones. But for the people in the city who were not in the direct path of the tornado, they were experiencing all sorts of extreme weather, unlike anything that we see in central New York. The storm raged out of control for about 10 minutes. I stayed under the folding table, and when I made my way upstairs, it was a disaster. My house was filled with broken glass, with water that came through the windows, and with branches that had blown through the screens. When I made it out onto my front porch, it was still raining, but the first thing I saw was the neighborhood in disaster. Trees were down everywhere, power lines, debris from houses, roofing materials. You couldn't even discern yards or property lines because there was stuff everywhere. Metal roofs had crumpled up and blown throughout the neighborhood. A big piece of metal wedged itself under the back of my Jeep. I remember noticing that all of my belongings from my porch and from the front of my house were gone, blown away. But the scope of the damage really didn't set in until I started to take a walk through my neighborhood. As bad as my house was, the tornado went through 2 houses down from mine. I was saved the extent of the damage. Huge trees were uprooted. Tops of trees were snapped off like toothpicks. Roofs were literally blown off houses and scattered throughout the streets as planks of wood and roofing debris. Entire streets were impassable, and there wasn't a utility line to be seen. Everything had been knocked down, and most of the power line poles had also been knocked over. While most houses in the neighborhood sustained damage, what was really the most obvious in the change of landscape was the fact that so many trees had been knocked down, broken, damaged, and destroyed altogether. We're not talking about 1 or 10. We're talking about hundreds of trees, old growth trees, maples, pines, oaks, things that were 40 to 80 feet tall, things that have been there for decades, all gone. Despite the fact that I was on the ground, walking through the neighborhood, seeing the destruction firsthand, the scope and scale of the destruction wasn't really that obvious to me until I flew the drone. As I was looking at the screen of this drone footage, I couldn't imagine what the aftermath, what the end result of this tornado was going to be like, considering every tree, everything sustained damage. These were trees that I have seen my entire life. The landscape of the area was something that I've been familiar with for 40 years. And now, in the course of 10 minutes, everything had changed. Damage and destruction was rampant. I didn't know how some of the houses were going to be rebuilt because of the extent of the damage. Trees literally splitting houses in half, garages torn down, cars flipped over on their sides and back. The amount of damage was literally incomprehensible. And as I walked around and I saw very few people, the one thing that I kept wondering is, where is everybody? How many people had been hurt? Over and over I tried to call 911, but there was no answer. It just rang and rang. As I walked around my neighborhood surveying the damage, it was very clear to see where the tornado had gone through. What I didn't know, though, was where it had come from and where it had gone to after our neighborhood. In the coming hours, as people walked through the neighborhood and as I asked questions, it became all too clear what had happened in the city as a whole. If I thought our neighborhood was bad, if I thought the damage we experienced was significant, it paled in comparison to what other areas of the city had experienced. At this moment, all I heard was sirens. I quickly learned that all roads in and out of the city were impassable. And as I panned around with the drone, I noticed some staggering changes in the city landscape. I flew my drone to the maximum distance that I could, and what I saw was unbelievable. The damage to the city was astounding. The tornado that came through Rome on July 16th, 2024 was categorized as an EF-2 tornado that had sustained wind speeds of 135 miles an hour for more than 10 minutes. While we had a lot of damage in our neighborhood, the heaviest damage was most noticeable in downtown Rome, where those wind speeds crumbled aging structures. There were 2 churches in Rome whose tops were entirely destroyed. Steeples fell into the church, and roof structures were completely disintegrated. All around those areas, buildings were torn down, leveled. If you didn't know any better, watching the footage of what had happened through the city, you would think that this was Tornado Alley. Things like this simply don't happen in central New York. This storm made national news due to the obscure intensity of it in relation to where it's found in central New York. What we learned that summer through published meteorological studies is that Tornado Alley is shifting, and more extreme and significant storms are to be expected in the Northeast. So what we experienced in 2024 was not an isolated incident. Extreme storms continued to happen throughout 2024 as well as 2025. In total, in the summer and fall of 2024, we experienced 32 tornado events in central New York. This tornado had the unfortunate distinction of being the strongest and the worst and the most devastating. Over 100 buildings suffered catastrophic damage as a result of this tornado. Hundreds of trees were destroyed and demolished. Buildings crumpled, and even this commemorative B-52 bomber, the Mohawk Valley, that sits at the former Griffiths Air Force Base site in Rome, New York, went completely vertical and landed 20 feet off of its foundation. Since 1950, there have been 4 EF-3 tornadoes ever reported in central New York. Ours was at the top of the scale of EF-2 with just 1 mile per hour wind speed difference between ours and an EF-3 tornado. The release date and time of this video is very specific. It's exactly 1 year and 6 months to the day since the tornado ripped through Rome, New York. And to this day, the city is still recovering and rebuilding. One church is being rebuilt, one church has been torn down and it's now just an empty lot. And across the city, damage and destruction can still be seen if you look close enough. Sometimes the only clue being random empty fields here and there. It took 1 year and 1 month for the B-52 bomber to be put back on its original foundation, and it was done so in usual military ceremony. And you can still see the real damage in the city through trees, piles of trees, broken trees. The trees are the real telltale scar that the tornado happened. And throughout the city, homes and rebuilding continues. As for me, my house suffered damage to roof, siding, windows, doors, and electrical across my house and detached garage, all of which has been fixed, so I'm in good shape, thankfully. But that's all for this video. I know it's a little bit different than the normal videos, but I thought it was important to show. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.